Welcome to Inspirational Journeys, everyone. My name is Ann Harrison, and today my special guest, Victoria Zigler, aka Twinkling Tori, and I are going to talk about one of my favorite, well, two of my favorite things, children's books and poetry. And we may dive into some of the fiber arts that she does, but we're going to talk about writing first because that's what we're here for. Welcome to the show, Tori.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here, and it's a pleasure to have you. So, why don't you start by introducing yourself to the viewers and the listeners?
So my name is Victoria, but I prefer to be called Tori. But I publish my books under Victoria though because I promised my mother I would. And I am a vegan who was born and raised in in the mountains of South Wales in the UK. I moved away a couple of times, once to live in Canada, in Alberta, for a few months, and another time to spend several years living in Hastings in the southeast of England. And I write children's books and poetry, as you've already mentioned. I have 62 titles published. Well, three of them are anthologies I'm involved with, so I can only claim 59 as only mine, but it's still enough to begin along with.
Yeah. So, what inspired you to become a writer?
I always enjoyed it. I spent a lot of my childhood in hospital, and things that are easy to do from a hospital bed involve using your imagination for reading and writing. And with always having sight problems, sometimes reading books wasn't necessarily an option, so I'd have to make up my own stories. So it just started from a young age. I learned to actually read and write when I was about 3 because one of my babysitters and my older brother were doing homework and I wanted to do it too. So they taught me. And children over here in the UK start school when they're about 4 anyway. So I learned to read and write quite young, and then just establish a love of stories from having to be involved with stories and my imagination while not well enough to do much else in hospital beds. And it just kind of expanded from there.
Wow. So, and the reason I called her, and the reason I said Twinkling Tori, because that's her name when she comes up on Zoom. We are both American Council of Blind members, and in the community, I've seen her on Zoom as Twinkling Tori. So,
Yeah, that you can thank Kayla for that one.
yes, we know each other from ACB Crafters. So first of all, what instilled your love of? How did you get started with poetry? Let's put it that way.
Well, I'm Welsh, and poetry and music are very big in Welsh culture. So one of the first things that I was taught in school was about writing poetry, and I just loved it from the word go. And it was a way I expressed myself. When I was having a hard time dealing with stuff, I was encouraged to write it down, and I would quite often end up doing so as a poem. And it
Wow.
just kind of kept being something I did.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that. At first, I thought I couldn't write poetry, but in 2019, and people have heard this story before, but I will be happy to share it again. My friend and now author coach Jen Lowry, she did a prompt on her Jen Lowry Writes, which is a 50-word story. And I wrote that 50-word story. Well, it wasn't quite 50 words, and it didn't go anywhere because it morphed into a poem. And then I wrote 3 poems that day. So telling people I can't write poetry is a big fat lie because the more I kept saying I can't, the more I proved I can. So, and this being a faith based, the more I say I can't, the more God proves that He can. Um, and how did you come to write children's books?
Well, when I was learning about the basics of writing and stuff in, in school, when you learn about sentence structure and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, I sort of took to that quite quickly. And when I was about 7, there was a writing contest where some of the older children were supposed to be being entered. But I, along with one or two others from my class, were considered good enough that our teacher submitted our work anyway, even though most of the other children were like 11 and older. And I actually won third prize for that story. It was about little green men who I stopped from destroying the world by convincing them with Ready Break, which is a kind of children's cereal, kind of similar to oatmeal. So, how could they destroy a world with oatmeal in it, essentially? Um, and I still have the medal I won during that contest.
Oh
And
wow.
and I've just written ever since. And I tried when I got older to like write stuff aimed at older audiences, and I just found that I had a stronger passion for writing for children, and it showed enough that people enjoyed my children's stories more than they enjoyed the stuff aimed at adults.
Wow. So I have to ask this because you and I both are, I call us crochet writers, and I know you do more fiber arts than just crochet. But question is, when you're doing your fiber arts and when you're crocheting, do you find inspiration for your writing sometimes when you're doing that?
Sometimes, yes, because I mean, while you're doing the craft, your mind wanders, and it's when you're being creative in one way, it's only natural that you end up being creative in other ways, and for different people, that will show up in different ways. But one creative pursuit leads to another, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. That is true. So why don't we start talking about your latest book? What is it? Kind of tell us a little bit about that.
So, my most recently published title is called Jelena. It's about a dryad who um, doesn't get warning that her tree is the one that a family has chosen to be the Christmas tree. So she has to try and deal with the quick severing of the bond when she wasn't ready to sever the bond, and she has to find the strength to carry on without the tree that she's been bonded to since she was young. Um, and part of the reason for my writing that story is at the time I wrote that, and also another one I published a little while before it called Teddy and the Soothing Snow. Um, I was dealing with my grandmother died. Um, she died during the first year of COVID, but not because of COVID. And I was having a hard time dealing with it, a hard time writing after losing her, because she's just always been there. She's the reason. She's what got me into crafting. She was a big influence in my love of stories because she'd read to me a lot when I was younger, and I was just having a hard time of it. So I ended up exploring a couple of different ways of writing about loss and grief and about moving on after that. And Jelena is one of the results of that.
Oh, okay. Is it a picture book or
It's a children's story that could potentially be a picture book, but I don't illustrate my books because the images are not accessible to me, and
right,
I focus on making my books accessible rather
right.
than illustrating them. But it could potentially be turned into one, though um, I do also warn that, more sensitive readers might have a hard time with the theme of it because more sensitive readers may not be, younger, more sensitive children may not be able to deal with reading about loss in the way I've portrayed it
So I know
in
you
that particular
you
story.
self-published yeah, sorry. You
Go ahead.
self-published your books, but did you have some help with the editing and formatting and everything?
A little bit of help with editing. I always have somebody double check the editing, especially since I can't spell to save my life. My spelling is absolutely appalling, though I do have a valid reason for it because my early education was done in Welsh, and in Welsh, if you can sound the word out, you can spell it. And unfortunately, that's not how English works.
Nope.
So it's given me a huge problem with spelling. Like the last time I did a spelling test in both languages, I had 98% in Welsh and something like 60 something in English.
Mm.
Um, because despite the fact that the English one I revised harder for. Um, because I just really struggle with spelling in English.
Mm.
So I do have help with editing because I need someone to at least do a proofread. Though I do the initial stuff myself, I do need someone to at least proofread afterwards and check my spelling mistakes and stuff like that. But the formatting, I do it myself.
Oh, okay. That sounds really interesting. So, do you have any tips or takeaways that you want the listeners and viewers to walk away with?
Um, well, a lot of my stories do carry lessons. I mean, that's part of writing for children, lessons about uh, dealing with grief, like in those particular stories, or like I've got an entire series dedicated to making adaptations for people who are adjusting to sight loss, so that people who are visually impaired can still do the things that they could do with sight. They just have
Hmm.
to do it in different ways. So exactly what I'd like people to take away from my stories depends on the story itself, but mostly I think for an overall theme, it would be to accept that everyone is different and that just because you can't do things the way that most people do them doesn't mean you can't do them at all. It's just you have to find your own way of following your own path.
Yep. Oh, I hear the doggies. Um, so where can people find you online?
I have a website at www.zigler.co.uk, and Zigler, for those who don't know, is Zigler. That's Zulu, India, Golf, Lima, Echo, Romeo. But you can find my books on Smashwords, which is now partnered with Drafter Digital, Amazon, Audible, iTunes, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, and a whole bunch of places like that.
Hmm.
Anywhere that Amazon and Smashwords distribute to, basically.
And I'm going to give you a tip, and those of you who are listening and watching too, because this might help you. Now since Smashwords has partnered with Draft Digital, you can go to books the number 2read.com and set up custom URLs for custom universal links for your books, so that way when you're promoting a specific book or you want to promote your books on socials, you can use those universal links instead of having to put 50 links up there. I
Yeah,
don't know
and
if
then
you were
people can
aware
go
of that.
to. I am, yes, but it's good to make sure that other people are, and then
Yeah,
and then with those links, people can then go to the bookstore they prefer to shop
yeah,
at.
right. Oh, good. You do know that. Okay, so are you working on anything now?
I'm working on a couple of different projects. A, a collection of flash fiction 500 word stories about celebrating some alternative holidays.
Hmm.
A sci-fi story that was based on a incident during the pandemic when my husband and I were out, and there was a recorded voice reminding us to follow the lines and the painted arrows and keep 6 feet apart. And I had this image of a robot coming out because somebody had breached that with a disinfectant attachment. And I mentioned it to a writer friend, and she said that I should turn it into a story. So I've been working on doing so.
That sounds like a fun novel there. That sounds like
And I have a couple of others at various stages of production as well.
oh
I've
wow,
always got things at different stages of
well,
production.
that's it's awesome that you keep working. So, and I've asked this to other authors that I've had on the show. And if you're not sure about it, that's fine. But if do you have a call to action, like a challenge or a resource that you want to leave us with today?
No, I mean, um, Obviously, my the generic call to action, which I'd really like for people to do, is to go buy my books. I mean, please. Um,
I just talked to somebody like that that said that the other day.
um, um, but beyond that, I mean, mostly though, if you're an avid reader, read a lot. If you're an aspiring writer and you want to write, well, write. If you want to publish, do it. The only thing stopping you from doing it is you not doing so.
Well, and with that, I'm going to leave you with a challenge. I challenge you to go out there and read to get inspired, write something inspiring, and share your creation with the world. For when you've touched one life, you've touched thousands. Thanks for joining us on Inspirational Journeys. And thank you, Tori, for being my special guest today. And remember, your story matters. Have a blessed day, everyone.